All right, everybody. I actually changed my mind. I'm actually going to be broadcasting this as well as showing this live on Discord. I have posted this online, so if there's anybody who wants to chat in that way, they can. So I'm going to be watching both comments on Discord and on YouTube. So there we go. All right. Let's see here. So let's go over just a few things that we wanted to talk about first and foremost before we get to the meat of this whole podcast. There's not that way much in the way of announcements. I just want to remind everybody that we are still trying to get a we're still trying to change over to the new job posting system. So just as a reminder, in order to post jobs or to post advertisements for jobs or volunteer opportunities, you need to make sure you go to the posts guidelines channel and agree to the terms there, and then you'll use one of the templates there. I think that's the only announcement that we have here for today. So we're just going to go ahead and get started here with the design. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of talk a little bit about what design actually is and what people think it is first. So first, I think a lot of people think of design as creating things that look nice, things that look aesthetically pleasing, or what would be considered to be, oh, it looks polished. Nothing could be further from the truth. Design is far more than that. Design is a lot more to do with what the user is going to be going through than what they think about the website itself. That's not what a web designer is. They aren't a PR manager, because if they were a PR manager, there would be a lot more involved than just picking a few colors, typography, and a few other things. Um, highly recommend this book right here, the Design book, because it talks about those things that we were just talking about. In fact, that's what the chapters are all about. It says, um, they say proximity, alignment, repetition, contrast. So there was this book here, but all throughout this book, it talks about the reasons why they do those things. It isn't, and not once is one of those things saying it looks more polished. It just looks more professional. It looks more, yeah. Even I can't even come up with a really good word for that. So I have to ask, what is design then? Well, design is basically the same as UX or user interface design or creation. Now, user interface or user experience is something I talk about a lot on the server. In the next few weeks, I'm actually going to be releasing a course on user experience. But some of the things I want to talk about today have to do with user experience. So when it comes down to it, there you can break these things down, but really you want to just keep in mind that design is more about making the site usable for the user rather than making it pretty. So, with that in mind, let's talk about what we want to get here. What's the first step in getting something useful? Well, it's really all about the path that you're going to be creating. And a path is not really so much about, I'm not talking about a path of how you're going to accomplish it. I'm talking about the path that the user is going to be taking. So let's say, for example, we're making a website about ducks. Okay. Okay, that is a very vague topic, and people will do that to you. They'll say, okay, what's your business all about? Oh, well, we sell bowls, we sell shoes, or we do such and such service. Okay, great. What's your site going to do for you? Um, it's going to get my name out there, and it's going to make people want to do business with me. There's a lot of different variations of that, but that's basically the gist of what they're going to say. You've got to guide them into a flow for what they want to do. So how do you get your businesses? How do you get them to buy that? Well, I do, and then they're going to launch off into something. Pay attention. Pay attention to what they say, because if, for example, they talk about this grand sales pitch that teach to their employees, you're going to want to implement that into the site. If they talk about all the things that make them better than everybody else, that's going to be something that you're going to want to implement into the site. But you'll find that you're going to have to adapt what they have to web format in a number of ways. So the first step is going to be getting that direction, that flow of where you're going to be going from point A to point B. So if it's point A is the person gets to the site, and then point B is somebody buys from the site, you're going to figure out what that path is. Then you're going to design that path and make it so it's actually traversable. So let's talk about how that usually works for me. For me, I like to use pencil and paper. I actually have here an example of one of my flows I was just doing just the other day. I have a list of things I did. You'll notice that I didn't write anything. I didn't draw anything quite yet. I was writing down what I wanted it to do. Then I'm going to draw on here, and I actually have this journal here. If you take a look, it actually has little bullet points. This is a perfect little thing for it. It's called a dot journal, and I highly recommend you get one of these because what it does for you is it gives you a place to write and to draw at the same time. So I use this pencil and pen and paper, and I just sketch out things. Let me see if I can find a good sketch here. All right, yeah, this is going to be good enough. All right, so here's just one of those things that I drew. Now, you're not going to find anything really any more complicated than that whenever I'm drawing something out. We see what I'm doing here is I'm doing it piece by piece. I'm not going to be drawing out everything all at once. That's going to take way too much time. You're going to be looking at your you're going to be looking at the finite details first, then you're not, or sorry, if you're looking at the finite details first, then you're doing it wrong. Just a second, I'm going to switch over here to YouTube and make sure that there's nobody here that's actually trying to chat with me or anything else like that. I don't think there is. Okay, so if you have that there, if you have all the details already worked out, guess what? You did it wrong. Because you're at step 1 of the design. You're not going to be going through this whole design process. So the first step is to get the basics of it down. So that's going to be just a series of boxes where things go, and that's all going to be concentrated on answering questions about your flow. You want to keep that in mind because you're not talking about how things look. Keep away from the look until the very end of the process, and you'll see why. The process is going to take care of it, that part altogether. You don't have to worry about polishing it. You don't have to determine if you're going to have a material look. You don't have to worry about iOS look. You're worried about your flow. So you make something very simple. You draw a few boxes and then a few objectives, and then you take your design to get feedback. Notice I haven't even gone to my computer. I haven't even gone to put anything on my UX system. This is something that will take you 5 minutes to get it done. That's why it's always worth it, because this will get you far. This go further down the path than going on there and saying, okay, I'm going to go ahead and create a mock-up here in Photoshop. You're going to spend 3 hours trying to figure out what you're going to be putting together, and then you're going to get lost in all the different complexities of the system. Whereas with Photoshop, if you're at that point, you should already have an idea of what each of the aspects of your design are going to be. You see, this book right here, it talks about basically the steps 3 through 7 of what you're going to want to go through. Not steps 1 through 2. Not steps 1 through 3. It's going to be the very beginning. And the beginning is your foundation. You don't skip over this part. So then, once you get through that part where you're like, okay, now I'm going to go ahead and now I have everything worked out, that's the point where you start creating alternate designs. Now, that means you're going to be drawing a few more designs here. And this is where you're like, okay, how do I know what to put into my alternate designs? So we're going to talk a little bit about the principles of user experience here. So if you're taking notes, this is the time to start taking notes here, because I am going to be listing off a few user experience things that will be actually included in my course. Let me go to my notes here as well. Now, these are principles of design that you probably have not heard of because they're not the typical ones. These are things that have to do with user experience, not so much design, but design is user experience as we've already established. You can't have one without the other. So, with that in mind, we're at now step 2 of the whole process, and this is where we're going to start bringing in these principles. And we're not going to be worrying about how the whole system looks aesthetically. We're talking about how the system functions at this point. Now, everyone who has this creative mind, they're going to be like, "Oh, that's totally against what I want to do. I want the developers to be talking about this. This isn't the developer's job. This is not the developer's job to come up with a user interface. The user interface is the designer's job, in conjunction with what the developers say the program can do. But the user interface is going to be the designer's job. All right, so I'm just about there for my notes. All right, just about there. It would help if I actually had my systems. Oh, sorry, I had my son come in there for just a second. Okay, so the 8 foundations. Here we are. All right, so we will talk about this. So here are the principles. Are you ready? They are efficiency, the idea that the system is going to not leave fat on there. There's not a whole bunch to the system that isn't necessary. You're not going to have a whole bunch of buttons that don't do anything, and you're not going to have a system that is going to make you go through 100 steps just to answer the question, are you male or female? That kind of thing. Then there's learnability. Learnability is the idea that you can actually gain an idea of how the system works in a fairly quick and a fairly low effort way. So the difference between these two and simplicity, you're gonna find a lot of these actually have a lot of crossing with them. But the idea of learnability is how fast can I learn your system? How easily can I get a handle on your system? It's not, and this could be a complex system, but you can make complex systems easily learnable. Go ahead and play any video game, and you'll see exactly what I mean. Because a video game is complex, but it's learnable. Okay, familiarity. This is where you really have to go look at what other people are doing. You can't really come up with a design yourself. You are not a user experience engineer. You do not have the resources, the focus groups, everything else like that. You're going to want to go ahead and go with what people are actually used to. Otherwise, you're going to be designing this website a lot longer because the way that things get familiar is time. And you don't have the time when somebody visits a website to actually say, okay, this is my convention of how I do things. So even if something looks entirely fantastic, we've seen websites that have done so many fancy and wonderful things with their user interfaces, but they aren't the standard practice no matter how long they've been around because it's not what people are used to. Okay, now mapping. Mapping is very important. Okay, mapping is where I can actually have a mental image of how your website works. This is where you have your header, your footer. You know exactly where those are going to be on your website just by me saying that. Navigation, anything else like that. Mapping is the idea that you make things easy for people to know where they are when they're going to go ahead and find it. And it's also the idea that you don't make things so complex and so foreign to them that they are like, okay, this makes sense, and then come back 2 days later. Okay, now I'm going to have to reread this and figure out how this works. Okay, motivation. Okay, this for you game developers, this is going to be your thing. Your motivation is going to be the idea that you're going to put points onto the website so that if they do certain actions, they get certain points. They could be a score. It could be, and then could be down to just making it so that the site is friendly enough. Motivation is going to be something that you're going to want to incorporate a lot into the system, and that's and that's going to depend on the job, but you'll see, we'll talk a little bit more about that some other time. Trust. Trusting is a huge part of it. Now, let me tell you a little bit about trust. If you go to a website and you see that it's used by big companies, like if you go to a framework like Electron and they put down, we are used by Microsoft, Spotify, VS Code, whatever, you're going to be like, oh, those people use that? Okay, I'm definitely going to go ahead and do that. That's part of trust, but trust is also the idea that if you don't expect the system to break, you don't expect the system to do something that you didn't intend to do. So you got to make sure that when you say get a quote, you're not sending them in for an advertising scheme. You're actually going to be building a system for a quote, that kind of thing. And then finally, last principle, visibility. Visibility is the idea that things are accessible. They can see where things are, they can associate where things are supposed to be, and it's not hard for them to see. You don't have gray text on dark white or whatever. You make it so that it's accessible. All right. So those are the 8 principles of design. And let me go ahead and check again, see if there's anybody that's wanting to have comments here. I have one person watching on YouTube right now. That's probably me. And we have just a few people here. All right. So now we've talked about user experience. We've talked about the 8 UX standards. And now we're going to talk about how to incorporate that into your alternate designs. Now you're going to go ahead and check to see which of those 8 principles are the most important to you and for your job. You see, for one business, simplicity might be more important, and whereas motivation would be more important. One example would be that you have a business that's all about how easy this hammer is to use. Okay, simplicity would be a big part of their design, wouldn't you say? Whereas if it's a video game design, you want to motivate them more. And so you're going to make that more part of your designs. And you're going to experiment with your factors and say, okay, I want to gear it toward this. I want to gear it toward that. And then you're going to go ahead and take it in to get feedback. So we have a fantastic place for feedback here on the server. It's called the Get Feedback channel. It is one of the most underused channels here, where you can just say, okay, this is what I'm going for. This is what's important to me, and then you put out your design. We can give you feedback of what we think about this. This is what the server's biggest strength is to have that feedback built right in. You don't have to just use the server just to answer questions about how to center a div. You can talk about how to actually do this particular design. How can I make this more motivating? How can I make this? And notice, again, I have not gone to a computer this entire time up until I'm just going to go ahead and get some feedback for this. Now, this all sounds like it's a long, drawn-out process. Steps 1 through 3 can literally take an hour. That's all it would take, is an hour's worth of work, is to get that done. Especially once you get really good at it, and if you don't do this enough, just like any other skill, you get faster at it. Okay, now this is where you're going to start going into step 4. Step 4 is polishing the design and testing it out. So there are a lot of ways you can go about doing this, but a design is it's just as good as the designer makes it out to be. And the only way you can actually get feedback, if you can actually grade and test it out, is really to just test it out on people. So a few things you can do. I use Adobe Xd. It's a fantastic tool that allows me to create a mock-up of the system, as well as make it a little bit functional. So I can make the buttons actually do things and see if people actually can figure out my system. And I can tell you, I have been surprised more than once on just, oh wait, that button doesn't make sense to you? That kind of thing. Okay, so we have a question from Harapol. Thoughts on Figma for designing? Figma is a great tool, but it's underused by most people. Most people get the free version, which is fine. But if you're just using it just to make a picture that you can show your clients, you're not doing this right. Your design should be polished enough. When you hand it off to the clients, you're going to want something polished and ready to go that you can explain everything to. You're not just going to say, oh, look how pretty this is. You're going to want to say, okay, this is how it's going to work. And you're going to take them through the flow. You're going to want to have a great idea of why this is. Otherwise, their only feedback is, it doesn't look as pretty to me. Ever hear the term, beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Well, that's what a client is. It's no different than with clients. Your client's aesthetic preferences are going to be very different from yours. Your job as a designer isn't to match that. You're allowed to be you. You are allowed to have your specific style. In fact, when you display your portfolio, display your style so that people know that's what to expect. That being said, when you design a mock-up, you're not cookie cuttering if you show them the same type of styling, because what you're doing is you're taking your style, your flavor, and applying it to a design, a flow, a user experience. Does that answer your question, Hero Paul? Okay, great, grand. Okay, so now let's say that we've tested it out and we've gotten just enough. Just a second. Sorry about that. My son's really wanting to be part of the show here. Anyways, so you have that system, and you have. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put a pause in here for just a second because my son's got to talk to me for just a second. All right, so sorry about that. So now we're going to go get back into this. So we have our feedback design. We have the idea of which design actually works better. That's what the testing is going to be about, is which one are you going to go about doing. Now you've got to really kind of put it together. And that's the hard part right there, is implementing this grand design that you polished out. And at this point, you're going to probably want to use tools like Photoshop, Xd, Figma, and this is where you're going to see what you are used to. You're going to see the idea that okay, I'm going to add this color, I'm going to add this gradient here. And this is where this book comes into play, where you start to say, okay, now I want to make it easy for people to use my system. We have books like this where they talk about typography, contrast, everything else like that. And I have blog post after blog post about every one of these things. And again, that part of design really does deserve its own podcast all unto itself. But needless to say, if you don't know the basic skills of design, you're probably going to want to learn those. So learn about typography, learn about alignment, learn about grouping, learn about contrast and depth of field in photos, that kind of thing. Learn about those things so that you can actually implement that into your design. But you'll notice when you're doing that, like, okay, this is how this works here. This is how this works here. And not everything's just going to be an arbitrary, oh, I have too many things centered. No, I have everything centered because on the other sides, I have the UX elements. So you're going to find that if you do it this way, your design process will be much better because you're going to be creating websites that people actually will come back and use. Now, let's talk about step 6, where you start your presentation copy. Now, you're going to want to get somebody to actually throw your ideas and look at this with. So if you have a partner that you work with, great, because then you have a built-in feedback system of another professional. If you don't, come back to the feedback channel. Say, this is what I'm getting ready to show this to my client. I'm getting ready to show what this program can do. And you're going to want to do this in a number of ways. You're not going to want to do this in photos. Again, you are not going to want to do this in photos. We are in the modern era. Use a freaking video recorder. Record your screen and show them what they're going to be getting. If the customer gets a bunch of photos, they are going to get the experience that you're hoping that they're going to get. A group of photos with descriptive text, yeah, that's great for a presentation if you're giving like a sales pitch for PowerPoint, but you're not there. Most of the time, as a freelancer, you're going to be sending things back and forth via email or calls or whatever. Loom is a great tool that you can just go ahead and just record the video and talk about what you're saying. Get ready for the presentation, re-record it at least 3 times before you get ready to send it off. And there's step 7. Once you go ahead and do that, hold yourself accountable to standards. In the development world, we have unit tests, and unit tests have conditions that say, okay, it has to do all these things and come out with all of this. Design has something similar, where you're going to have a bunch of things where you're going to say, okay, this has to be look like this. It has to be responsive. It has to be all the things. And guess what? We talked about all those already. They're the 8 principles we talked about. You're going to want to make sure that your design meets each one of those criteria in the order or the weight that you had determined in the beginning. And you're going to find that this is the part where you're going to be either really happy with your product or ready to rip and repeat. If you feel like you need to rip and repeat, I implore you, don't do that. It's going to be a little bit of tinkering here and there, or it's going to be, oh wait, this wasn't so important to the business, and change your weight system, and that's okay. Changing out your weight system is completely fine. So there are the steps to a fantastic design in a very abbreviated form. Now, I am going to give you a couple of pitfalls to watch out for. Number 1, don't compare yourself to the big boys. The big boys have an army of UX engineers, and they still get criticized for their design. How often do you absolutely love it when Facebook comes out with a new design? Or how about YouTube when they came out with their new YouTube design? They force that on us because they have the power to do that. This is what I was talking about beforehand, where you're like, okay, how do I make things more familiar? You don't. You don't have that power. These big boys do. And so their designs and their new things, yeah, you can follow what they do, but don't try to do what they do, where they try to push new and improved designs that sometimes are good and sometimes are terrible, are on the general public. Go with what actually you know is going to be good. You don't have the time to do that. You're not getting paid $20,000 to come up with a new UX flow. You are being paid to make something that they know will work. And I can guarantee you, most small businesses aren't going to appreciate a genius button to slide format. They're more concerned about what will be the best for their business rather than what would be the best for the future of technology. The second and final pitfall I'm going to talk about is don't make things overly busy. If you find that you are putting a ton of UX elements on a single page, you are not making a Swiss Army knife, you are making a monster. A Swiss Army knife conceals everything into one little handle. But that's the idea. It's concealed. You don't see everything all at once. Not everything comes out of the Swiss Army knife all at once. You take one tool out and then put it away. You put another tool out and put it away. When you're designing your designs, make sure that you're doing this. Make sure that you are making it so that they can take out what they need or work with the system that they need and aren't being prompted to do a whole bunch of other things that they don't really need to do. Don't put everything on the screen, because what people have been led to believe is that what's on the screen is important. So if you have a bunch of customizations for a website builder, if you're building one, and then you put that all on the screen, when all they really should be doing is just clicking and dragging and dropping, you've made the system overly complicated and they're going to be stuck there. So just don't do that. Okay, so I'm going to open this up now for questions for everybody. Um, I've got to get going here soon. I got to pick up my wife from work soon, so we're gonna wrap up things a little bit earlier than we usually do. But I hope this has been enough for everybody. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the text chat or in the YouTube chat. So, let's see here. Do we have any questions in YouTube right now? I don't see any there. So, let's go over to Discord. Okay, no questions from Haripal, and I don't see any questions from anybody else. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap up this podcast now. I really appreciate everyone actually joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Next week we're going to be talking about let's see here. Gotta look at my schedule here. Next week we're going to be talking about tech stacks. All right, yeah, no problems. And yeah, Haripal, thank you very much for joining. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful day.